there.
hanging in there.
We have multiple environmental disasters unfolding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something with the air, right? In
Yeah,
California.
the air is full of well, it's full of smoke. There's forest fires, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not supposed to go outside at the moment.
Really? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the air is so bad.
Okay.
Yeah,
So everything comes together.
that's right. Yeah, the pandemic and now the fires
Mm-hmm.
over.
And a student that is sick.
The student got sick,
Mm-hmm.
so
You're teaching privately from home?
yeah, I'm teaching. I'm teaching at the university,
Mm-hmm.
also from home and privately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Goldberg, what a name.
It's the name that Chinese immigrants gave to the city of San Francisco. They called it Gold Mountain
Mm-hmm.
when they first
Beautiful.
came.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you started to play music?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's always interesting to do. Can you point out a specific reason or a happening that, yeah?
Yeah. Well, my mother played the clarinet
Mm-hmm.
when she was a student, and when I was little, she had mostly stopped playing, but she still had her clarinet,
Mm-hmm.
and I was fascinated by it. She would take it out and play a tune once in a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just beg her. I forgot what I didn't even know what it was called. I was like, "Hey, mom, can you take out that black thing out of the box and play some music?" I was fascinated by the clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
This is like before I knew anything. And then when I got in elementary school, then they let us take lessons and be in the band. So and that was the same clarinet that I started playing on.
From your mother?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. A Noble. It was a nice clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
I still had it.
Father played music as well, or was it coming from the mother's side exclusively?
Yeah, my father didn't play music. He was a professor of communication. And yeah, so I got all the music from my mother's side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And what age was that?
Well, I started when I was in the 4th grade. That's when I began taking lessons at school.
Mm-hmm. This is 9,
so,
10?
9, I think.
9, yeah.
Yeah, I think 9 years old. And I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and they had a very good music program in the public schools.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent music program. And so my very first teacher and band director, a man named Willie Hill, he was a fantastic musician, and it was his first job. He must have been just in his 20s or something.
Mm-hmm.
He traveled around to all the elementary schools and taught band. So we'd get pulled out of class like twice a week, and we got to go and play in the band.
You know, and what kind of music did you guys play during that time? What kind of style?
At first, it was just like learning the fingerings on the instrument, and then there was like band music, and it's funny because I do actually remember this one song because there was like a rock tune that we got to play. And it was called what did they call it? Not petroglyph, but petrology. I bet you could still look up that song. It was like arranged for beginning band, and it was called Petrology, and I thought it was the coolest song I'd ever heard.
I remember, yeah, made an impression.
You made an impression.
Rock and roll on the clarinet, yeah.
Yeah, and the clarinet takes a long time. I mean, at first it's no fun at all. It's a real struggle, for years, squeaking all the time, not knowing where to put your fingers.
Yeah, quite something.
I'm kind of amazed that any of us stick with it.
Yeah, I think you're talking about something very important that can turn off a lot of people in the beginning when try to play, and somehow it's frustrating, and if you don't have the nerve to stick with it, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you look back and you realize there was a very strong drive, a very strong inner drive that got you through that initial period,
Any gigs as a teenager? Started to play gigs, or what?
Oh, wow. I was a little late.
I didn't do the research because I would like to hear it from you.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
In music,
I feel like I was a little late to that whole thing, but so when I got into middle school, or what we called junior high back then I got to play in the jazz band. I had to play the alto saxophone.
Okay.
Play in the jazz band, and my teacher, my clarinet teacher, a very fine clarinet teacher, Raymond Corellis. He was the guy that actually started the International Clarinet Society back in the 1970s. And he told me to go out and buy Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm section. He was like, "You want to know about jazz? Get this record." That was a pretty smart thing to tell me. That's a great record, you know.
Art played clarinet on that one?
No, just alto saxophone. But I was trying to, because they wouldn't let me in the jazz band as a clarinetist. I had to be I had to play the saxophone. So, and then, but gigs, there weren't really gigs for me until high school. I'm pretty sure the first paid gig that I got, I was thrilled. It was playing clarinet at a party at the local German, what did they call those things? It's like a German cultural society. Like, I don't know if they even have those things anymore, but it's like society, a society that had been started by German immigrants to the United States, and and so we went and played polka music. Yeah, and they paid me $20 or something like that, and I was thrilled. And I think it was my first gig.
I had to get rid of another guest while I was doing the sound check. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem.
He tries to log in, and I have to kick him out all the time. $20. That's quite something.
Yeah, $20 felt like a lot of money. And I was terrified. I remember being terrified of the whole concept of playing music and getting paid. I felt like I couldn't possibly be good enough to do that. You know.
Yeah. And you found when you grew up, like your friends, your neighbors, they were into music and into kind of playing instruments, or was it a lonely thing?
I feel like it took me a while, probably until I was in college, before I really met people to play music with, you know. But I practiced a lot when I was little. Like, I really got into it. And I was very lucky that when I was in junior high school, I was in the band, and there was a guy called Andy Stevens, whose father was a clarinet teacher. And Andy was a remarkably good clarinet player. Even in 7th grade, he was unbelievable. And he was the first chair in the band, and I was the second chair. And basically, I didn't realize how much better this guy was than most clarinet players of that age. So he provided a model for me that was very, very advanced. So I kind of thought, like, well, I want to be as good as the first chair player. So I better start practicing, because Andy practiced 1 hour every day. So I was like, all right, I can do that. And I started practicing an hour every day when I was in 7th grade, because I wanted to be as good as Andy Stevens. And then I stuck with it, and then that expanded. Then when I was in high school, I went to a music camp. There's a music camp at a place called Interlochen in Michigan. And I just said, okay, this is it. Now I'm really going to practice. And I started practicing 8 hours a day.
Wow.
That was the goal. The goal was 8 hours every day.
What age was that?
That was 14, 15, something like that. And I stuck with it. Even after, this must have been terrible for my neighbors, because when I got back after the summer camp, I still wanted to practice 8 hours a day, but I had to go to school. And I started waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and practice for 5 hours before going to school. That was the only way I could envision doing it.
And those 8 hours were the magic number that somehow you thought?
I just got it in my mind. I don't know why I thought 8 hours.
Oh, cool! Yeah.
Yeah. and I wasn't playing jazz then. I was just playing. I mean, looking back on it, I, I, I can't believe that I stuck to it. But it was all like etudes,
Mm-hmm.
rose, close, scales, et cetera, et cetera. But I really practiced.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the fundament for everything what you later gonna play anyway, if it's whatever style. So we're working on your chops, yeah.
Definitely,
Mm-hmm.
definitely, yeah. And then I was super lucky because when I was in college in Santa Cruz, I got a chance to start studying with Rosario Mazzeo because he lived in Carmel. I was going to school in Santa Cruz and he lived in Carmel. And that was like a 1 hour drive away. So I started taking lessons with him. You know Mazzeo, right? He invented that clarinet that Selmer used to produce.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar, yeah. And he wrote a book about the clarinet, no?
That's right. He wrote a book, and he used to play in the Boston Symphony. But for most of his career was actually not so much as a player, but really as a teacher. He became a really, really good teacher. And I went and I knew I wanted to take lessons from him, so I went and auditioned for him, and I played something. And he thought about it for a second, and he said, well, you're not a clarinet player, but it's nice to meet somebody who should be a clarinet player. So I was like, okay, I'm there.
Supposed to me.
So then I took lessons with him, and he really straightened me out, man. He totally straightened me out. It was like technique. I had no idea before that. I had no idea how hard you could work on the clarinet. I worked so hard, and a lot of stuff that I had thought was impossible on the clarinet. You know, like that's just the way the clarinet is. Like playing a leap from one note to another, or you know, a low note to a high note, or whatever. You know. He was like, okay, let's get to work. We're going to solve this. You can do it. And it was really hard work, but I made a lot of progress. And I felt like things started to become more clear and the technique got easier.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's about it in terms of actual clarinet training.
Yeah. Sounds quite intense.
Boy, was it intense. Oh my God. Yeah, we would play scales extra slow. I mean, it was rough. I would sweat. Every lesson I would just be drenched in sweat because we worked so hard.
You're doing the same with your students now?
Well, that's a good question. I've taken the principles that I learned from that study, I use in my teaching. But honestly, most of my students are studying improvisation with me, and not so much like how to be a clarinetist. We do get into that, you know, especially stuff about articulation these days and tone production. If the student is a clarinetist, we'll get into that. But for the most part, people are studying with me to learn more about music and improvisation.
It would be interesting to find out what you're working on with the students, what to kind of learn about you, about your concept that you're try to deliver to those people.
Yeah, totally. You want to talk about that now?
We can. It doesn't matter. It's just just.
Sure, of course, because it brings up another important teacher. Like one of my important teachers was Rosario Mazzeo, and the other super important teacher for me was Steve Lacy.
Okay.
Because I only took one lesson from Steve Lacy. I had to beg him for years. I begged him for years to have a lesson, and finally he told me to come over to his house, and we had a lesson. And it was just like one afternoon, just a few hours. And and he didn't consider himself really a teacher, I guess, especially at that point. But basically he laid out for me that he showed me the kinds of exercises that he had used when he was young, that he had invented for himself in order to get better at music and to understand what music is made of. And that had a huge effect on me, huge effect. It was, I think I was still studying with Matteo at the time, but the stuff that Steve Lacy told me, it lasted, I don't know what, 10 years or 20 years. Exercises that had to do with intervals, study of intervals, and how to play scales. Steve Lacy told me to play the scales very, very slowly so that you could listen to the scale as you played it. And I did that. I mean, the important thing is that I took him very seriously, and I basically did those things every day for like at least 10 years, every single day. Couple of hours of these exercises that where the goal was to learn about music on the most fundamental level that you could. Intervals, tonalities, and what I discovered, and I think this was Steve Lacy's intent, was that if you know when you study the basic building blocks of music, then it opens up a world to you where you can discover your own music. Then you discover your own music, and then that became clear to me. And that's how I got started making my own music. Was from the basically it all came out of that lesson with Steve Lacy. So I think those are kind of like the two models that I have for teaching. One, Matteo, because the model of like intense work to solve the problem, and Lacy, kind of the same thing, but like, but the goal of developing your own exercises in order to open up the world of music fundamentals.
So what would that mean, like as an example, like shifting intervals?
Yeah, well, the thing that Steve Lacy told me to do, and this is all, I'm pretty sure all this stuff is in that book that he published called Findings. But the thing that he told me that he did, this is fascinating, and it's so smart. He said that he had read something in a book by Stravinsky, where that Stravinsky had made a comment that you should learn music based on intervals. So Lacy took that comment and he was like, okay, how can I do that? And he had this idea. What he did was to write down all the intervals that you could play on the soprano saxophone. And in other words, literally every possible combination of two notes on the instrument. So that's a lot of intervals.
Yeah.
And then he wrote them all down.
So kind of the Slonimsky book, or what?
Well, I'm not too familiar with the Slonimsky book, but it's like saying, like, let's translate it to the clarinet, because I took that advice and I did it on the clarinet. So the first interval that I wrote down was low E up to low F. Then I wrote down E and F sharp. Then I wrote down E and G. And I wrote down all the intervals I went up to a 12 because I felt like clarinet's based on a 12. So I'll stop when I get to low E up to B. Then I wrote all the intervals that started on low F. F and F sharp, F and G sharp, F and A, all the way up to F up to C. Then I wrote all the intervals starting on F sharp. So you can see that that's a lot. You're writing down, it took 9 pages. It took 9 pages.
The whole range of the clarinet.
Yeah, the whole range of the clarinet until I got to high B up to high C. You know, that was the last one that I wrote down.
Quite some intervals, yeah.
Yeah. So now I got not every single interval, but I, within a practical range of a 12th, every possible combination of 2 notes on the clarinet, from a minor second up to a 12th. Then, see, this is the brilliant part that Lacy told me to do. He said, then you snip that up with the scissors into just individual intervals, put them on a bowl, mix them up, pull out one at a time, and write it down again, but in this order. So you pull them out one at a time. So now you have a random order.
He wanted to put some fun into that basket, I guess.
This was super important to him. Yeah. So now you have random order of every interval, and then you write it down again. So that's why I got my notebook. And I have 9 pages. I think pretty sure it's 9 pages of intervals that were written down, pairs of notes. He said, then you do it. Then you every day you play. Well, his idea was, or maybe I thought it, I can't remember if he said to do this or not, but the way I usually would do it was I would play the interval, I would play the 2 notes, then I would sing them, and I would play them again, because the goal was internalize those intervals.
But how did you juggle with those intervals to improvise? Was it like, where does the system kicks in?
That's it. That's the system. That's the whole system. So then, and I was amazed. I had no idea, but right away the whole world opened up, because when I was playing, either by myself or with other people, somehow that study just became my whole language, and I had a whole different feeling about what I was doing, because everything started to become, you could say one note to the next, or you could say like one interval and then another interval, up or down, and my ear got a little bit better. I was able to imagine the notes better, but also I felt like new things began to happen, because, and I think it had a lot to do with the randomization of the intervals. Because in some ways, like if you write it down in a random order and then you play through that every day, you're kind of playing a song every day, a very weird song. But it is kind of a song, and you're repeating it every day, but it's your own song, and it's based on a random event of pulling these things out of a bowl. So right away you're dealing with a situation that nobody in history has ever dealt with. Right away you're working with something that's only yours.
That's a very interesting way, though. I mean, the way you came up with that kind of stuff, that usually a lot of guys that I talk to, well, they're hearing let's say Benny Goodman show, something like popular. They try to play it, they read a book, but it never came down to something like that.
That's why I felt so lucky that I mean, I knew that there was a reason that I wanted to see if I could take a lesson from Steve Lacy, because I mean, he was my hero. I couldn't get enough of him. I listened to his records every day, and when I was in Europe, I would always follow him around to festivals and clubs or whatever. He played in Paris a lot when he was at home, and I needed to know what he was doing. I mean, I just felt this need in me, like I had to, and I had no idea where it was coming from. It didn't seem to be coming from chord changes, you know, because I grew up listening to Charlie Parker, Art Pepper, and who I'm still crazy about. But when I heard Steve Lacy, I was like, wait a minute, what is that?
Totally different concept, yeah. So it's
totally different place. You know that one record called Evidence? That was the one that just broke my heart. And still, I can't get enough of that record. Unbelievable. But yeah, okay. So let's say that those are my 2 models of teaching. And so with my students, I try to emphasize I want people to, there's like a habit or something, or a routine that I want people to get into that goes like this. 1, I hear something that I like. 2, I do some work to find out what it's made out of. Let's say I hear Charlie Parker and he's playing a solo. Okay, good. Step number 2 is I'm going to write down that solo. I'm going to just figure out what it's made out of. Number 3, I'm going to study it so I can internalize it. I'm going to take it apart 1 measure at a time or something like that. and make sure that I can play what Charlie Parker played, at least the sequence of notes that he was using, and make sure that I understand it in relation to the harmony. Okay, then I'm going to identify what parts of that are what parts of that seem important to me,
mm-hmm.
and I'm going to make up some exercises so that I can get better at doing the thing that I've found by studying, in this case, the Charlie Parker solo.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a job to do, which is to make up some exercises. So I might say, like, and it might be anything. It might be like, well, I really like when Charlie Parker plays from the third of the minor 7 chord down to the fifth of the minor 7 chord.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Now I'm going to learn how to do, I'm going to practice doing that on all the minor 7 chords. It could be something like that, or it could be
something and learn it.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Or a lick, you know, like one of those beautiful Charlie Parker licks. Like, can I do that in 12 keys?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that's what it is. Or maybe it's even something like, well, one thing that I've been concentrating on with my students recently is, like, you can hear where Charlie Parker's beat is.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the head or on top, or?
Well, I'm talking about, like, in the phrase.
Mm-hmm.
His phrases are usually made out of you can hear where the quarter notes are,
mm-hmm.
but you can also hear that quarter note can be quite a bit different than where the drummer is putting, or the bass player is putting, their quarter note.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, okay, let's make up an exercise that helps us get better at that. I mean, I don't feel like I can learn how to play like Charlie Parker, but I can identify what I think is happening in that work and see if maybe I can develop my own ability to do that thing. Of course, I'll end up doing it in my own way.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I try to emphasize with my students is, if you want to learn something, you can make up an exercise. It's going to take hard work. This goes back to, like, the Rosario Mazzeo
mm-hmm.
example that I had.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you want to learn how to play from a low note to a high note on the clarinet?
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to work. If you isolate it as one goal,
mm-hmm.
and I really mean, I mean, Mazzeo he used to say, never practice to get generally better.
Mm-hmm.
Only practice to improve on one tiny little thing.
Uh-huh.
That's the only way it's ever going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was right about that.
Yeah. I think what's so beautiful about your way of approaching, from what I'm hearing, is that the goal is to understand something, but it's not about copying, it's about understanding the pattern, but then use it in your way, or in what you would like to achieve, something like that, right?
And that's where it gets back to the idea of looking for what you could call the fundamentals, or the building blocks, or something like that. Because if you can try to understand it on that level and make up a way that you can get better at working with that level, then there's only one possibility from that work, which is your own music. The only thing that can possibly result from that work is that you make your own music. That like with Lacey, like, if you're just studying intervals, you're always going to be in some weird new territory. It's not like studying vocabulary or licks or something like that.
But going back to those intervals for a second, I kind of understood, I think, or grasped the idea about all the possibilities. That's why I mentioned the Nicholas Slonimsky with intervals construction mathematically. And but when it comes to improvise, is it you're limiting yourself to a perfect fifth and using this one freely around the changes, or not the changes at all? Or I'm not quite sure if I understood how it ends up in music, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Well, for me, it was like, first of all, it had a big effect on my, I guess what you call free improvisation, because I felt like melodies were occurring to me.
Just following the line with the intervals.
Just forming the line with the intervals, yeah. For me, it wasn't so much a matter of like thinking it through in some way, like I'm only going to use perfect fifths or something like that. It was more just a matter, I think it kind of just improved my ear. I think it allowed me to hear possibilities that had never occurred to me before, because
intervals back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like based on that exercise, like if you do that every day, that means that every day you're actually doing, at least once, you're playing every possible combination of notes on the clarinet. And actually
every day.
Every day. Every single day. So every day I was hearing every possible combination of notes. One day I would do it going up, and the next day I would do it going down. So, and that's a lot that, you know, if you think about it, that's a lot of possibilities that otherwise you'd never ever play.
Exactly.
Never. You'd never play. I don't mean never, but I mean like every day, at least once I played from, let's say, extra high C down to A flat or something like that.
Yeah, you were exposed to all those intervals every day, and kind of opened up.
Oh my goodness, it's like a rainbow bursting in the sky. It's unbelievable.
Very powerful.
Yeah. And it gives you flexibility, because you're you know what I mean? Like, one thing that we want when we're improvising is you don't want to be in that situation where you feel like, I don't know if I should try this thing. You know, like, what if it doesn't work? Or I'm not really sure where it's going. And not that I became the world's expert on it, but I got a lot better at feeling like, boom, there's the note. Boom, there's the note. There's the note. There's the note. And the notes, in some ways, the notes became a little bit less important, because I had an easier time.
But were you thinking about actual pitches, or were you more like thinking intervallically? Like your world was like you were playing or improvising, whatever, but your mind was thinking of something like intervals or pitches, or nothing at all? Or
that's a good question, because I think what this exercise did was it kind of erased that distinction. Because of the way that, like I said, like you're practicing each exam. In other words, you're not just generally thinking about the sound of let's say, a minor ninth or something like that, but you're actually playing all the possible minor ninths that you could play on the clarinet every day.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes it becomes kind of the same thing, whether you're picturing the note or imagining the note or imagining the interval, or hearing the interval, because it's not just a minor ninth, it's this particular minor ninth.
What about the muscle memory? You found yourself going into those kind of things because you did it so long? Yeah.
It just becomes automatic. The whole world becomes this thing, and it's just like, you know what it's like? It's kind of like if you're a painter and you're mixing paints. You've mixed like 5,000 beautiful colors, and you've studied each one of them. So anytime you want, boom, boom, I use that, I use that, I use that, I use that.
But when you felt the muscle memory, for example, you had to be fresh and alert to keep improvise. Otherwise, you would be just playing kind of through your habits that you had over the years of playing all the possibilities, no?
Yeah, it opened up new possibilities. That was the thing. That was the amazing thing for me. It was like there were so many new possibilities that I just felt like I could go anywhere. And that's when that was a period where I started New Klezmer Trio. And that was a perfect band for me. Because I knew a lot of klezmer music, and I knew all the licks and all the intricate stuff that you could do on the clarinet. But I was also studying all these intervals, and then that came together, and that was the New Klezmer Trio, because I felt like it was a group where or at least I could just do anything. I could do anything. And the tonality would go over here, and the tonality would go over there, and up here. And I gave it's like I gave myself that opportunity, and I learned a lot doing it.
And from a technical standpoint, when you play like a big interval from a high note to a low note, or vice versa, what did you learn how to play? Is the mouthpiece always at the same point in your mouth, or you're shifting it back and forth? Or because this is also, you see different kinds of thing going on when players do.
Yeah, totally. I don't know about the shifting of the mouthpiece, but one thing that we studied with Rosario Mazzeo was to develop the muscle ability in the mouth, so that when you're playing the high note, the throat is kind of saying "ee," as opposed to playing the low note and the throat is saying "ah." And I worked very hard on that. And his idea was that if you can snap the muscles into place when you're hitting the high note, then you're able to articulate the high note at an even pitch.
Okay.
And the goal is to avoid boing, you know, like that. I hate that sound. I really hate it. And it's funny because that sound is typical of klezmer music, and I've never liked it. I've never liked that sound. But the goal was to learn how to attack the high note right at pitch, by snapping the throat and the back of the tongue into the proper position before you hit the note. We worked hard on that.
And the air support as well, I guess.
And the air support, yeah, that's right. So that becomes, after a while, that becomes automatic, I think. I still fuck it up sometimes. I still scoop up to that high note, and I'm like, ew, I don't want to do that.
Still some challenges left, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. What about bass clarinet?
Yeah, I played a lot of bass clarinet for a while, but now it's not bass clarinet anymore.
It's clarinet.
It's contralto clarinet.
Contralto.
Yeah.
Even more to carry around, yeah.
I had a dream last night that it had been stolen.
You better check.
Pardon me?
You better check now.
No, I did this morning. I have that dream a lot, that the contralto clarinet has been stolen, because it's one of a kind. I don't think I've
such a thing.
I can't stop playing the bass clarinet. I have a very nice bass clarinet. I have one of those beautiful Selmer Privilege bass clarinet, the new ones. Plays like a dream. I mean, it's so easy to play.
Yeah, I need one of those. Yeah. I don't know if
the other thing I'm playing these days is the E-flat Albert system of clarinet. I have an E-flat Albert system that I'm really enjoying.
Really? Never heard. I have to plug into electricity here.
Okay.
So it's all clarinet, right?
It's all clarinet. And these days, because, you know, I've got that project called Plague Diary, where I'm, during quarantine, I'm recording a new song every day. So I'm playing the synthesizer as well. Clarinet and synthesizer.
And is there something you discovered over the years, I mean, with this powerful concept of intervals, that you came across by yourself and kind of felt that you kind of innovated something, or came across something that hasn't been done really before, or that you enjoy doing, on the clarinet?
Well, that's a really good question. I've discovered that there are things that feel good to do on the clarinet, right? You know that. There's just things that feel good under the fingers. Like for me, you know, it's weird. I mean, I would just say that playing the note A flat, throat A flat.
You like that one?
It's fun. I mean, I can't explain it, but I just, the hands feel good, the mouth feels good. Okay. I like playing that note, you know? and there's certain combinations. Like I like, okay, along those lines, I really like playing an A flat major 7 chord or arpeggio.
For in B flat,
yeah. Also our E flat major 7 arpeggio, and I can't explain it, but it just feels right. It feels a lot more right to me, for me personally, than if I'm playing like a B major 7 arpeggio, which feels like where the fingers go. But other things, and now that I'm getting old, it's like I'm giving myself permission to pay attention and to follow that stuff that just kind of feels good on the instrument.
Yeah.
You know?
Playing certain keys, yeah.
Yeah. Because, well, here's another thing though, that is related to that topic, is that you know, John Schott, the guitar player, and I worked together a lot about 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And we spent a lot of time studying groups of notes. We started off studying 3-note groups, and we tried to write down all the possible things that you could do with 3 notes. And then we expanded that and learned 4-note groups. And we made a really interesting record that was based on that work, and I'm really glad we recorded it, because that was kind of, after that we didn't work together too much. The record is called What Comes Before.
Okay.
It came out on John Zorn's Tzadik label. And it's kind of made out of these studies that we did, where the idea was to find 4-note groups that we enjoyed the sound of. And then we invented different ways that you could move them around in relation to each other, or turn them upside down, or transform them from one into another, and stuff like that. And some of those 4-note groups have stayed with me because they're just fun to play. But in some ways, I think also the practice of using some kind of like chord or arpeggio or group of 4 notes or something like that, you use to use that, something that sounds pretty and it's an identifiable sound, and then to move that around, maybe in relation to harmony, maybe if you're playing on a song that has changing chords or even a static chord, a drone or something like that. And you can play different versions of something that is identifiable. And I'm not, to answer your question, I don't feel like I invented this by any means. I mean, I could think of different examples, including like Dave Liebman or some things that John Coltrane was doing at the end of his life.
So, for example, you looked for the shape of 1, 2, 3, 7 of a scale, and find it in other places in the harmony, and shift it around, things like that, right?
That'd be one way to do it. Yeah, that'd be one way to do it, definitely. And you could, and that's something that still interests me. That I feel like it's become a little bit more. For me, it's become less methodical or scientific and more intuitive. But I find that I do like working with something that in itself is like a pretty sound, but that when it's put next to harmony could either be pretty or it could be disturbing, depending on how it relates to the context. I mean, those aren't the only 2 possibilities. It could be pretty, it could be disturbing, it could be it could cause friction of some sort. It could be just like make a sound like it's kind of coming from another dimension or another world or something like that.
What kind of grouping do you like? What kind of shape of notes?
Let me grab my clarinet.
Please.
Because the other thing for me these days is that, you know, the shapes that the shapes that I like to play in that regard are they're kind of like specific on the clarinet, because it goes back to that thing I was saying of just like having some things that that just feel good. They feel good under the fingers. And I think, and I also think that the shapes that I like are also coming from those Steve Lacy studies that I did, and also the klezmer music, because klezmer music is kind of all based on different versions of what you could call the harmonic minor scale, and that's a scale that has like it just has that one ingredient in it. So I mean, just for example, just answer your question. Here's one shape that I find that I play a lot. You know, kind of like on the clarinet, B, C, E flat, F. And that's a pretty good example for me of something that like coming from from what I was talking about, like the days of the new klezmer trio. You know, because you have C, E flat, and F. That sounds like C minor pentatonic, or just C minor, and you add the B natural to it. That seems like C harmonic minor scale, or E minor with a leading tone, or something like that. But you can see that same group of notes also could indicate a B dominant seventh chord, right? And a bunch of other chords too. It could also go down to F minor, like F minor, but with a flat 5.
Or an F7, right?
Or it could be F7, or it could be A flat 7. It could be A dominant 7th. You know, it could be E flat dominant 7th.
G augmented.
G could be G augmented. So it has a lot of possibilities, and it's only 4 notes. So depending on where you like it can launch you either in that direction or that direction or somewhere else.
Or and transpose it. You can transpose it an octave higher, one of the notes.
Yeah, and you could say, okay. You can move it. You can pivot on. If you have a group of 4 notes, you can pivot between 2 of them and turn it upside down. In other words, if I leave the E flat and the F, let's say, I think this will work. If I leave the E flat and the F where they are as E flat and F, then I can turn it upside down and say,
There's a lot of material just with those 4 notes, man.
Yeah, just with those 4 notes. And you know, actually, I'll tell you another thing that is part of this is Skippy by Thelonious Monk. That song called Skippy, because if you learn that melody, and study it, and I should be able to just play it off. I can't. There was a day I could just play it off the top of my head. But if you study that melody, you can see that it's made out, because the chords are just moving around the circle. And the chords are moving around the circle. And most chords, the melody for most of those chords is basically 4/8 notes.
Okay.
And every group of 4/8 notes and it's all dominant seventh chords.
In the cycle, okay.
But every bit of melody is treating that dominant seventh chord in a different way.
Okay.
One of them has a flat 13 and a flat 9. Another one has a regular 13 and a flat 9. Another one has flat 9, regular 13, third, sharp 9. Every one of them is showing different possible configurations. So it gives you the idea that there's an infinite number of combinations of possible notes, like let's say 4 notes, like a combination of 4 notes that can relate to a particular chord in a unique way.
Yeah, I mean, there's material just with those 4 notes, and by invert the intervals or whatever.
Yeah.
More, less is more. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one, I have to say that, and that this thing, I mean, it always occurs to me right there. I mean, actually B, C, E flat, F. I can do it. I could transpose it to different places, but that's the place where I hear it.
Yeah, feels good in C, I guess, this one.
Always. And then there's keys on the clarinet that should be easy, and I can't play anything in them, like our key G. A lot of songs are in that key, F concert.
Yeah.
I can never think of anything to play in that key.
Don't like
it. Not because it's a hard key to play in either.
Yeah, you're the A flat guy, you told.
I guess so. That's where the ear ended up.
Well, up to you in which key you play those songs.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, a lot of, I mean, common jazz standards or whatever are in F, G for us. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people enjoy playing in that key. I know that.
Interesting. Yeah.
And not because it's technically hard. I just never hear anything in that key.
I think those interval studies rubbed off too hard on you. Boy, but I wish more people would come up like that, because I mean, such a powerful system that you described, having learned from Steve Lacy with those intervals. I mean, besides playing the scales and what the stuff that everyone has access to, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was. Well, I've been thinking about this. You know, it's like the pathway of wisdom. And I think the pathway of wisdom, it only goes from one individual to another. And if you're hungry for it, you're going to find the people that can open that door for you.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I heard something in Steve Lacy and I had to find out more about it. I just had to. And I chased him around for years, asking him for a lesson, because I knew there was going to be something there.
Finally, he gave up and surrendered.
He surrendered. Yeah. Lucky for me. Lucky for me, but also through my own efforts, you know, because I knew that there was going to be something there.
Yeah.
You know, and the other thing that Steve Lacy told me, and I think he told me this on purpose, because he saw that I kind of worshipped him. I basically worshipped Steve Lacy, and I think he kind of saw that. And so he told me that, he said, you're drawn towards something that for you sounds like the truth, let's say, or the thing that you think embodies wisdom or the truth or something like that. And he said, you get closer and closer and closer to it. And when you get close enough to it, you see that what's really happening is that the thing that you thought was the object that contained the truth turns out to be kind of like a curtain.
Okay.
The light shining through it. And he said, as you get closer to that thing that you're pursuing, the curtain parts, and you see that there was something behind it. A light that was shining through it. You thought that the curtain was the thing, because that's where the light seemed to be coming from. But when you get close enough, you see that there's actually, and I think what he was talking about was like a tradition of knowledge or a tradition of wisdom or a lineage, something that comes down to us through one generation after another. And that he kind of saw that I thought it was him, that for me, he was the guy. I was like, if I could have played like Steve Lacy, believe me, I would have. I could have just figured out how to sound exactly like Steve Lacy. That's what I would have done. And he knew that. He could see that in me. So he was, I think that's why he told me that. He was like, in a sense, he was kind of saying, you think it's me, but it's really a tradition that I'm part of.
Yeah, nice of him to share that. I mean, it's just, I mean, the knowledge itself doesn't make music. I mean, you have to work on it. It's not just a free gift. Yeah.
That's right. And and getting back to the topic of teaching, that's what we give to our students. We give them a way of working on things so that they can develop the wisdom in themselves. I mean, that's how it works. That's our only hope in the world.
Yeah. You mean to pass it on to them, to some other guys?
Oh yeah. And to try to pass along some knowledge of the work that's required. The work that's required. I just feel like that we're seeing the huge kind of battle that seems to be getting fought right now politically and internationally and stuff like that. I think it's all about that. I think that what we're talking about has to do with traditions of wisdom or traditions of learning on the one hand, and people that don't understand that or have no need for it or want to dominate other people on the other hand. You know,
I think that was a beautiful closing of that interview, because we have only 1 hour, but you know that you have wisdom that could fill some more sessions was delightful. And thank you very much for having that loose conversation with me about the clarinet, about how you came up and how you dealt with everything. And yeah, it was very
beautiful. Well, thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Good. Stay in touch.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you very much, Ben.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.